I want to introduce Dan Jacobs from GSA. Quick background on Dan. Dan is the Senior Security Architect for Centers of Excellence in Technology Transformation Services at the U.S. General Services Administration. So Dan, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thanks, all. I appreciate it. We'll see if you're clapping by the time this thing is over. Thanks everyone, event coordinators and Symantec and government exec. I really appreciate the invite. This is a nice, cozy venue. Let's kick this thing off. And there we go. Who am I? Well, I'm Dan. I'm a senior security architect for GSA's. Wow, this thing is. Technology Transformation Services. I've only been here for about a month. Prior to that, I was GSA Cybersecurity Coordinator, where we did an awful lot of cross-government and whole-of-government work. Trying to work on all these cross-government initiatives is really great, but I needed to get back into the thick of it. But prior to that, I was the Senior Cloud Security Architect for the Department of State, where we worked on the Foreign Affairs Network. Foreign Affairs Network, to my knowledge, is the first and only, I think, cloud-exclusive FISMA moderate enterprise as a service. By cloud-exclusive, I mean it's wholly cloud. There's no reach back. There's not even identity back to terrestrial brick and mortar. And my job in that was to pave the way for Security Operations Center as a service, a construct at the time which didn't even exist, but when you're creating a cloud-exclusive enterprise, you have to do something. So that was my bailiwick. And to be honest, it's been several years since then. I'm still working that issue today. So enough about me, a little bit about GSA and GSA Cyber role. It's difficult to be in our community without really appreciating what GSA brings to the table. Approximately $25 billion in IT spend goes through our acquisition vehicles. Back of napkin, maybe 3.x billion of that is for IT security. But it's not just the contracts, it's also OGP, Office of Government-Wide Policy, and that's where I worked at before, where they engage cross-government partners for nearly every executive order, memorandum from OMB, law, etc. GSA has established all throughout our community and pretty much all of our authoritative guidance. Really heavy play on that side. But it's not just that either. There's also, within TTS, there's services and products. You might be familiar with FedRAMP. Some folks, not sure. But there's also cloud.gov, data.gov, Federalist. That's one of my favorites. Love it. Secure cloud platform, Federalist. Look it up, federalist.atnf.gov. Fantastic. And then my home, the Centers of Excellence, which is a really interesting answer to the President Management Agenda for innovation for IT across all of government. We do some really fantastic stuff, coe.gsa.gov. So enough of that, and let's talk about the keynote today. So, Black Hat is going on right now. And I thought it would be kind of cool to just highlight some of the lessons learned from Black Hat. It's been going on for well over 20 years now. And I said, let's take a couple of these ideas and see what's out there and what sticks. And then they said, hey, you only have 15 minutes. I said, all right, well, then let's focus on 2 or 3 of them. So dial the Wayback Machine to 2003. Bruce Schneier, and I really hope you folks can read this, but Bruce Schneier, who's an absolute titan in our industry, basically says our community, our security community, is so inundated, we look to proxies to prioritize the work for us. Proxies in this case, international standards, bodies, laws, frameworks, and things like that. This was 2003. 16 years ago, and you can see that he was absolutely dead on. I don't want to talk too much about that, but I'm going to take a tangent on that. And if you recall, maybe 5 years ago, Cybersecurity National Action Plan, anyone? It's an initiative from the president, and the president basically said, okay, so I have about 14 or so initiatives that we don't do very well across government, and what I really need is some cross-government initiatives, get some work group together, get some people together, and start addressing these. Find some solutions and submit them to the federal CIO. I happen to be on one of these groups because I co-chair the Small Micro Agency CISO Council, and one of the initiatives was make our smalls, non-CFO Act, make our smalls more secure. How do we do that? So I was invited to sit on that, and I worked through it. And the bottom line up front is that the idea that I brought to the table was ultimately the one that won out, and I got the opportunity to pitch it to Tony Scott, CIO at the time. And what I told Tony is essentially the work that I did at State. The best thing that we could do for these folks is provide them 5, 6, maybe 7 core services, provide them well, and we don't have to worry about the security because we can do that centrally. And he said, I'm really surprised. I expected a security solution. And I said, well, with respect, Tony, sometimes the best security solution isn't actually a security solution at all. And so the philosophy that I'd like to provide here, the takeaway is, sometimes a product is not necessarily the answer. Sometimes it's something else. It might be workforce modernization, it might be training, it might be any number of things. But if you have 125 products in order to score an ATO for your enterprise, maybe 126 isn't what's going to get you there. Same black hat, 2003. It's almost as if someone was there. It's amazing. Keith Rhodes, who at the time was GAO's CTO, says, in our audits, we're finding more errors with execution than we are with the actual technology. And 16 years later, GAO just cut last month, I'm not sure if you've seen it, on 19545. It's 75 pages of GAO findings that say the exact same thing. Before I worked at State, I was the CISO for a DoD component with a global reach enterprise. And the order came down to migrate from DICAP, which was the DoD Information Assurance Certification and Accreditation Program, to RMF, NIST. So we went from DITSCAP to DICAP to RMF. So these orders came down, and I took about 3 months of time working on what it would look like for our agency to move over to RMF. I pitched it to the CIO. He absolutely loved it. And the notion was that if we're going to do this, why don't we continuously work on automating our auditing processes so that we could ongoing ATO our system? He said, this is absolutely awesome. Let's do this thing. So between the CIO and I, it took 6 months to implement, but we had what is effectively an ongoing ATO. We covered all of our controls in a very short time. And it was really cool. That was about 6 years ago. How many folks do that today? Not many. Why? Is it a technology problem? I'm not sure. I think the takeaway here is many of the problems that we face as a security community aren't actually technical problems at all. Many of the times they're human problems. And if we're not equipped to deal with that, we're going to continue to bang our head up against the wall trying to figure out the way forward. So fast forward 5 years, this is only 10 years ago now. Dan Kaminsky, another titan in our community, at his keynote says, hey, cooperate. Work with other people. You're not alone. We are a community of security professionals. We all have the same goals in mind. We're looking to defend our interests. Whether they're national interests or corporate interests, irrespective, we're here to defend networks. You're not alone. Work with other people. How well do we do that? 10 years ago, we didn't do it very well. Today, we have all kinds of opportunities. I just recently was selected to be the federal sponsor for the ACT-IAC Zero Trust Networking Group. So what I'm doing is I'm looking towards organizations. If you're interested in zero trust, if you're ready to move forward on it, I'd really like to talk to you about it. I want to embed with you, learn your lessons, so I can put them in a non-attributional format and let the rest of government learn from those lessons. This is the kind of stuff that Dan was talking about. What else is there? Here's a great opportunity. Bug bounties. Ladies and gentlemen, if you aren't looking at bug bounties as a potential solution, I implore you to consider it. Think of it. We know bug bounties, right? What we're saying is that I am going to hire thousands and thousands and thousands of security researchers to take a look at my stuff, to deliver vulnerabilities to me, and I'm going to pay them what I think those vulnerabilities are worth. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not going to find a whole lot of other opportunities where you get to decide how much you pay thousands of security researchers to work persistently for you. It is a fantastic opportunity. In order to get the bug bounty, you need a VDP, which is a Vulnerability Disclosure Program. Look for that soon in the theater near you. Just a hint. The third piece for cooperation, threat intelligence. Folks, threat intelligence is your friend. If the National Security Agency hires threat intelligence folks, you can too. Because at the end of the day, in your security journey, if you're operating in a vacuum, you can expect to suffocate. Don't do this work alone. There's too much for you. Next and lastly, I'm going to do this and then shut up. A paper in 2007. Oh, thank you. A paper in 2007 out of Cambridge Computer Labs, Cambridge College. Oh, yeah. It basically says the incentives within the information security community are potentially askew. So here's an example. Anyone remember a couple years ago there was a Finn who found, he was a security researcher, he found a vulnerability within Instagram, submitted it to their bug bounty program, and Facebook, who owns Instagram, was going to cut them a check for $10,000. Not a bad haul, right? But Facebook took their time doing it. It took them a couple months to get that check to him. Not because it was an international transaction and he was a Finn, because he was 8 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, incentives work. If you can get people on your side and properly incentivize them, they're going to work their hearts out for you. Please do not underestimate the power of incentives. Let me cap that off with this example. His name, I'm not finished, I'm just going to say Johnny, J-A-N-I, so Johnny. Let's say 10 years from now, Johnny decides he wants to come to America, land of opportunity. Let me ask you a question, a serious question. Here's a kid who's going to have 10 years of real hardcore security research under his belt, and he wants to work on your team. If you're a supervisor, what are the chances you're ever going to see his resume? Do you incentivize a CSSP or a degree or other professional certifications? You may not ever get this young man's resume in front of you, and that would be a terrible shame. So the takeaway here is take time to question what you're incentivizing. So let me put all this together. We've covered a few things here. I'm going to sum up. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. Anyone seen this? Federal Cybersecurity Catalog. This comes out of CISA, DHS. 45 pages of programs. Some of them are mandatory, but a lot of them are volunteer. Some of you pay for, some you just take part of. If you don't have this on your desk, you need it. This is a fantastic resource for you for cooperation across the industry. So 4 things. Sometimes the best security solution isn't a security solution at all. Sometimes. Sometimes the problems that we face are not exactly technological problems. Sometimes they're human problems. 3, agencies which operate their security in a vacuum should expect to suffocate. There are way too many resources out there to branch out and expand. And 4th, you get what you incentivize. So if we were to put all these things into one, here's the grand takeaway. In your cloud journey, I'll just say this for everyone, sorry it's small. In your cloud journey, the greatest challenge may be to change the narrative away from incentivizing product-heavy siloed security models. Some of those may look great on the dashboard, but we need to move the incentive towards outcome-based cooperative systems that are directly aimed at the relevant, credible threats that you're experiencing today. In your cloud journey, it is critically important that you work with partners, that you consider all your objectives. Folks, if your security team is operating on PDs that are 10 to 15 years old, folks, we got to do something about that, right? So consider some of these factors that aren't so obvious to us, and I think you'll have a much better time. Folks, you've been a very patient crowd. You've been great. Thank you very much for your time. I think we have a couple minutes left. I can answer a question or two, but I'm out. Thank you. Sure.
So you talk about the importance of partnership between competitors and researchers and within industry. What about breaking down some of the barriers between industry and government so that we can better collaborate? You know, often we have to maintain this arm's length relationship because of the procurement rules, that type of thing. Or often, you know, the vendor community is categorized as a vendor, not a strategic partner to our government customers. And I agree. I think we need to do a better job of breaking down these barriers and looking to really solve the problems around outcome-based solutions rather than going in and trying to sell more stuff. I think everybody's got plenty of stuff, right?
Indeed.
So how do we more effectively move that forward?
I think it's a great question, and I really wish I could answer you. I think the problem, as you've already stated, is a legal issue, right? There are legal constructs which determine how the government interacts with vendor partners. Volunteer organizations, much like the ACT-IACT and the others, are probably better venues. So for instance, when I did the phase 1 for Zero Trust Networking, there were representatives from Cisco and multiple Forrester and a few other Zero Trust providers were there. But they took their badges off at the door, and they understood that the products on the back end of those would be vendor agnostic, would not be flavored towards your specific solution. And if there was no way around it, then it would simply be omitted, because that bias must be, the bias towards non-biased must be maintained. That's the only way I know of at this time. It's a horrible answer to your question, but it's a legal issue. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not really sure where to go with it, but I acknowledge that it is difficult.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, folks.